Hi, and welcome back to Stage 2. This is a series of videos in which I'm looking at the first book of the Bible called Genesis. We're looking at the chapters 12 through 50 in this series. The first series based on this book was called Beginnings, and there we looked at the first 11 chapters of Genesis. So I'm hoping you find this to be a very interesting and an eye-opening experience to follow these videos. I think if you stay with it, you're going to find a fascinating and an incredibly impressive story that sheds so much light on ourselves, on our world, and on God. The last video we ended with a look at chapter 12, and in that chapter we discovered Abraham, a bit of a restless spirit following in his father's footsteps, a bit of a traveler, and God had promised Abraham and Sarah, who were childless and getting on in years, that nevertheless they would have an incredible number of offspring. And God had told them to pack up, to move on, and to visit and travel through the land of Canaan, because God told Abraham, your offspring, your children, will live in that land. It is the land I'm promising to you. So you may have heard the expression, the promised land. This is where that expression comes from, that God promised land to the descendants of Abraham and Sarah. So Abraham does get going, and he travels over. When he's beginning his travels, God promises him all these great things, not just the land, but he also, and this is, I think, the most impressive promise, he promises that Abraham and his children will bring God's blessing to all people groups, to all nations on the planet. This would begin with Abraham. His offspring became the Jewish people, and the story goes on in quite some ways. It involves Jesus and the church, but that's an awfully long ways down the road. We're going to stay with Abraham. So God's made all these impressive promises to Abraham, many offspring. You will be, your children will be a blessing to the people of the world. And so Abraham moves out, and with God, a bit of a challenging journey, absolutely. Also, at the end of the chapter, we discover that Abraham, even though he's given all these impressive promises, has a flawed character. It turns out he's a bit deceptive, and he kind of puts his own wife a little bit on the firing line. So he lacks courage, and he's eventually booted out of his host's home, his host being the ruling family of Egypt back in those days. So that chapter does not end very well for Abraham. Still, we're going to move on. So now we're diving into chapter 13 and 14 today, and I call this video the Battle of the Nine Kings, and you'll see why I call it that. Anyway, beginning of chapter 13, Abraham has grown enormously wealthy. You read in chapter 13, he's got all kinds of herds, so many different kinds of animals. He's got wealth. He's got money. He has a large group of people we're going to discover who work for him. He and his nephew Lot have settled sort of in the southern part of the land of Canaan, where God had told him to go. The thing is that Lot and Abraham were both quite wealthy, quite successful. Abraham more so. Lot, though, also has wealth, and there's not enough room on the land to sustain all their herds and to live, for all the people to live. But I think especially the sustaining of the herds was a major issue. So the herdsmen would quarrel which animals get to pasture in this land or this land, and that kind of thing. So finally, Abraham and Lot, I think Abraham draws him aside and says, look, Lot, we shouldn't have difficulties between us. We're family. So why don't you look around, Lot, that's his nephew, and why don't you look around, Lot, and why don't you choose the land which you want to live in, and I will choose from whatever you don't want. I'll give you first dibs on the whole thing. So Lot looks around. he notices that, he's known this for a while, that along the Jordan River, where there's lots of water and so forth, it's very fertile. He chooses this very fertile part of the region to settle, and he says to Abraham, "That's what I want." And Abraham says, "Fine." So it's interesting because I think what's going on here is that Abraham and God, they have a conversation in the chapter. God says, "Look, Abraham, I will bless you," and God repeats his promises to Abraham to provide for him land and offspring and prosperity and all these things. So Abraham is walking more closely with God than Lot is. And Lot, on the other hand, is favoring his material wealth. And he's taken a bit of a risk. And here's the risk. I know he's chosen the best land, but in that land are some mean warlords and their establishments. So we discovered that in the region, in the valley where Lot has chosen to live, at the end of chapter 13, there's just this warning signal that kind of shows up in the story that Lot is pitching his tent close to the city of Sodom, which in one translation was inhabited by great sinners against the Lord. We'll learn more about Sodom in the next video or two. So anyway, Abraham is continuing on with his path, with God. Lot, not so much, but still they're finding a way to get along. Now, chapter 14. This is where things begin to be a bit dangerous. There is an alliance of four warlords, they're called kings, from the north and the east. These are folks who, when you look at the names that are mentioned, the names of where they come from, look at the names that are mentioned in the Bible, you look at a map, a map which is a result of study of the way the different tribal groups were arranged back in those days. So this is the area of Iran, Persia, Babylon, Elam, Turkey, a bit to the north. So some of these names are in the Bible, some of them are more modern names, but it's this kind of a region. And in this region there are four warlords, four kings who have quite extensive empires, and these are powerful people, and they have an alliance. So this alliance of kings with their large territories, when they would go to battle against others, as was typical in the Middle East and I think throughout the world at this time, when you conquered a territory, you took tribute, that is, you taxed, we would call it today, you took tribute, you demanded gifts from the local people, you took slaves, and you took women as the ordinary spoils of conquest. So this alliance of four kings conquered the area where Abraham was living. And there are 5 warlords or kings in this particular area. For, I think it's 13 years, these 5 kings allow themselves to be subjects of the alliance of 4 from the north and the east. And after that, they rebel. So these 5 kings, they rebel against this alliance of 4. This alliance of 4 is a bit distant. They're several hundred kilometers from the area where Abraham is living, so you can see where they might think they can get away with rebelling. Anyway, they do rebel, but the alliance of the 4 comes down with brutality and vengeance upon the 5. So they sweep through the area. As they are sweeping back up again, they rake more devastation. They take lots of the women. They kill a lot of people. They take a lot of plunder back with them, and they take Lot and his family. Their big mistake, because Abraham gathers several hundred of his fighting men. He chases down these people, and he defeats them. He takes back all the war booty that the alliance of the four had taken, and he rescues the women and the children and all those who had been taken into captivity, and he brings them back to his region where he's living, which is, I don't think I mentioned this, but it's around the southern part of the Dead Sea, which you could see on the map today. And if you look at some of the reconstructions of the geography and of the mapping of the villages in those times, in Abraham's time, you will see some of the names that are mentioned in the Bible are placed there kind of tentatively, but that's the region, the southern part of Israel, southern part of Canaan, and so Abraham emerges as the great hero. So he's defeated that large raiding party of the four kings, and he brings back to the five tribal leaders, the warlords, the kings in his region. He brings back all their people, and brings back the plunder that had been taken from them. So the battle of the 9 kings, and Abraham doesn't do so badly in rescuing 5 of those kings who had been defeated by the other 4. Now, the story ends in a very interesting way. The king of Sodom, Abraham returns to him the people that have been taken, and he returns to him all the plunder. The king of Sodom says, "Well, look, Abraham, you've done a great job. Give me back my people. Why don't you keep the plunder?" And Abraham says, "No, I'm not going to do that." And I think that this is a very wise and clever thing, because Abraham does not want to be indebted to, so to speak, or beholden to the kings of the region. He is learning to be beholden to be indebted to God. In the story, Abraham is learning how to trust God. Very dangerous times. He succeeded, and he does not feel that he needs to be dependent on the other political and military powers that are around him, but he wants to be dependent on God. So this is a very good thing. So dependence on God, trusting in God, very cool. Not being indebted to the local warlord, especially the king of Sodom, who is not a good person probably. His city does not have a good reputation. And also another thing is that the promises that God had made to Abraham back in chapter 12, that God would bless the people who bless Abraham, and that God would have it in for the people who gave Abraham a hard time. These things begin to come true, because those 4 kings, their raiding parties had been very nasty to Abraham's family, and through Abraham, God defeats them. So this is very interesting. That part of God's promise to Abraham comes true. And lastly, and I haven't mentioned this, the promise of God's blessing to the people who bless Abraham also comes true, because there is one more king who we're going to bring into the picture. His name is Melchizedek, and he is the king of Salem, which eventually is renamed as Jerusalem, and Salem means peace. So the king of this city, the city of peace, comes to Abraham. He lays out some bread and wine for him, and he blesses Abraham. So this is a very interesting thing. That's all the stuff's happening to him. Abraham is, as also was promised to him, bringing blessing to the nations. He's bringing peace to his region. He's rescuing those who had been abducted. He's bringing the war booty back from those who've been defeated. So Abraham is bringing the blessing of God to his region. And the king of Salem responds very wonderfully and appropriately by going out to bless Abraham. So this is a very interesting thing. So Abraham's learning to trust in God. He's already bringing God's peace and blessing to the regions, to the people around him. People who try to do Abraham or his family in are not going to succeed. And so already we see that some good things are happening. And lastly, at the end of chapter 12, Abraham's character has not emerged as all that great. Remember, he's a bit deceptive. He's not trusting in God, but now he's beginning, we see, to regain he's learning. He's regaining some of his integrity as he walks with God. He's going to have some failures later on down the road too, but for now he's doing well. So we see here some great patterns for how we ought to be living ourselves in terms of trusting God, learning to trust God, bringing blessing to the people around us. So we're going to continue on with the story and discover lots of other great understandings for our own lives as we continue to explore the story of Abraham. So thank you so much for listening. It's great to be able to connect with you this way. May all go well with you in the coming week, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.